Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Reckless to Talk, our TTRPG interview show, where we sit down with some of our favorite writers, players, GMs, and streamers to get to know a little bit more about what makes them who they are. I am, as always, your host, GM Nathan, and this week I am really excited to bring you all a conversation with one of my favorite folks in the TTRPG space, Will Malkus from not-for-profit TTRPG studio live from the apocalypse. Will has long been a great behind-the-scenes friend and resource to us, as well as an in front of the scenes, great performer, storyteller, and general presence in his channel and in the TTRPG sphere. I always really admired how present he was in his performances and how easy he made his storytelling, player empowerment, and evocative character portrayals look. I've also always deeply appreciated the work their channel does for charity, encouraging people to donate directly to nonprofits they fundraise for and not compensate them at all, as well as their perspectives on a wide number of things, particularly in creating art here in late-stage capitalism. Long story short, Will is an absolute joy of a person and one of my favorites, and this conversation was a joy as well. With one final reminder that all of Will and Live from the Apocalypse's links are in the show notes, being the only further ado, here's this week's Reckless to Talk. See you next week. Hello, Will.
Hello, Nathan.
It is so lovely to be here with you. How are you today?
I'm excellent. How are you?
I am so friggin' excited and so happy and just generally put at great peace and joy in this moment as we sit down to do this Reckless to Talk recording. Do you know why that is, Will?
Why is that, Nathan?
It's because you're here, Will. And I'm so
happy to be here.
And so thankful for you to be here. Now, could you please, before we get too far, before we just get carried away with all of the enthusiasm and love festing, could you please tell our dear listeners who you are, how they should know you, all the good things?
I can do that. Yeah. Hi. Hello, everybody listening to this. My name is Will. You may have seen me around the internets or the Twitterverse, which is on the internets. Mm-hmm. I am one of the storytellers and organizers for Live from the Apocalypse, which is a not-for-profit TTRPG studio that makes actual play content on Twitch and in podcast form and does a bunch of other stuff, but it's all for nonprofits and things like that. We're all over the place and we do a lot of stuff.
That, I think, is a slight understatement. And, you, dear listener, can kind of make that decision and distinction for yourselves. But I will, at minimum, sign off on you do a lot of stuff. That is
I never say it's good. I just say there's a lot of it.
It is prolific, and that is a good word for it. Well, Will, thank you again for coming by. Really so friggin' excited to talk to you, about the stories that you tell, about the kind of like the very cool structure of Live from the Apocalypse. But first, we can't talk about these kind of grand things without starting at the beginning. So for you, how did you kind of first get introduced to tabletop role-playing games? And that can, of course, be just kind of like, oh, yes, I read Lord of the Rings or, read some fantasy or whatever, and then got hooked or whatever. But where does that journey kind of begin for you?
Well, I was born in a hospital in Brooklyn, New York in the year 1989. Mm-hmm. And no, I'm sorry. I'm always here to be like, yeah, hey, whatever this journey is for you, man, like very groovy. Please tell me. Start at the very beginning. I guess that's not inaccurate. It definitely started with my mom, who, as I was growing up, read me a lot of fantasy books. And then as I got older, I started to read them myself. Notably, the Chronicles of Narnia, I think, was probably where I started. She would read them to me before bed. When I got older, I read them myself, and that kind of naturally transitioned. Around the time that I was 12 or so, I think, maybe a little bit younger, I found the minifigures, the like lead minifigures that my dad had from when he played Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s.
Oh, cool.
And yeah. And I asked him about them at the time. I was like, what are these for? And he told me that they were about Dungeons and Dragons. And I was like, oh, it's a game. He was like, yeah, it's a game. You go through adventures and you have a character that you play. And I was like, so it's like Monopoly or something like that.
I mean, like, okay, I see that.
He was like, yeah, but there's no board or anything. It's all just kind of made up in your head. And I was like, that sounds boring. And I don't want to do that. Monopoly
Baseline was always a pretty boring game for me. And there's also no real rules. And it's all just kind of made up anyways. Like, don't know. I see where 12-year-old Will was skeptical.
Exactly. And from there, that was right around the time that the first Lord of the Rings movie was coming out, which was obviously a huge cultural touchstone for everybody in the Western world.
Yes.
My mom said that I was not allowed to go see that movie until I read the books, The Lord of the Rings, because she was a huge... Yeah.
Your mom, who makes frequent appearances in your live streams, which we may talk about later. But have you told her that she was a gatekeeper? Have you, like, now as an adult been like, you're trying to mold me into being a capital T true fan?
That is a great point, and I don't think I've ever thought of it like that before. But wow, she is very toxic.
Get good, read the books, know the lore. You can't enjoy it without having read the pure work of Tolkien. I mean, damn.
Yeah, thinking back on it, she did call me a fake fan.
Yeah.
And threw me out of the van onto the side of the road.
It's where the phrase actually originated. Pretty impressive bit of internet history. But so did you successfully read the books in time to see them in theaters?
I did, absolutely. And I was very hooked. The Lord of the Rings is very interesting. I will probably talk about this a little bit later, but I later would go on to study Lord of the Rings in my college program. Yes. Where I went to college, there was actually a professor who specialized in Tolkien studies.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, he's all over the place now. He's called the Tolkien professor. His name is Corey Olson. And at the time, he was a professor at the college where I was attending. He was actually my thesis advisor. But that was much later in the future. After I read The Lord of the Rings, I was like, this shit rules. And somehow, I think my uncle maybe introduced me to it, but I got my hands on one of the Drizzt Do'Urden Forgotten Realms books.
Ooh, okay. Yep.
And it was a hard pivot from Tolkien into R.A. Salvatore. But I was even more into that because the language was more accessible and I was a 12-year-old boy, and that's who that's written for.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's only so much, at least me personally, only so much like Hobbit poetry that I could kind of consume in my like, no, wait, I need action. Where's the action going on kind of situation at the time?
A common topic that came up in my college studies was that Tolkien was a linguist, not a writer. And at some point, as I was reading the Forgotten Realms books, I realized or found out or read an aside or something that pointed out that these were 100% Dungeons and Dragons. I was like, wait, this is Dungeons and Dragons? This is what that game is? Holy shit. And I went to my dad and I was like, remember that game that you told me about that I didn't want to play? I want to play it. I'm all in now.
Ooh.
Yeah. And he had the basic edition, like red box set, like the original one.
Oh, yeah.
And so my first experience ever with TTRPGs was my dad running, just me and him. He was playing like a DMPC through the Keep on the Borderlands, which is a very well-known original basic D&D adventure. And my first D&D character was named Duo. He was an elf. There were no classes. He was named after the Gundam Wing character.
I mean, I delight in hearing the teen first jumps into tabletop role-playing games because, spoiler alert, you're not the only one who made choices, flavorful, specific choices as well. So you're in safe company.
I'm sure I'm not. I actually went on to play incarnations of that character in 3rd edition, 3.5, and I think 4th edition as well.
Have you not for 5th edition yet?
I've actually played very little 5th edition.
That's fair.
I have run more 5th edition than I have played, mostly because one of the games that I run on our channel is 5th edition. And that was strictly because I was like, I should probably know something about this 5th edition thing. It seems kind of popular, but I've gotten the chance to play very little of it. I was very big into Pathfinder when 5th edition came out. And I don't know if you know anything about people who were very into Pathfinder when 5th edition came out.
A bit.
There's a prevailing attitude of why would I play 5th edition? I play Pathfinder.
Yeah, absolutely. We have some of them on our 5th edition podcast, in fact.
Yep. I have since changed my mind, but I was very strictly a Pathfinder player for a long time.
So how consistently, after you kind of got that first kind of toss into the keep on the Borderlands, that's the one, through kind of in your dad, I got to ask also, were you playing with the little like figurines that he had and stuff? Like, did you get the full immersive experience?
If I remember correctly, and I don't know if this came with the box set or not, but there were physical maps, and we did use the lead miniatures. The only thing I don't remember is if they were maps that he drew himself.
Yeah.
Either in the 80s or before he was running this for me, or if they came with the box set. But we did use.
Awesome. How much were you playing kind of from there? After, like, once you realized, this is what Dungeons and Dragons is, I would like to do some of that. Like, what kind of over the years, especially pre-capital C's content creator portion of your life, how much were you playing? What were you playing? Who are you playing with?
TTRPGs have kind of always been a big part of my life. When it started with basic D&D, we played a family game once a week. And during that period, my dad started seeing somebody. My parents were split up. My dad started seeing somebody who later became my stepmom, and she started playing with us as well. So it was very much a family bonding activity. It was, cool. I think my dad saw it as a way for us to kind of get to know each other.
Yeah.
I think another reason that he introduced me to it actually is because I was a very anxious kid. I have an anxiety disorder that I am much better at managing as an adult than I was as a 12-year-old. But playing TTRPGs, I think what really drew me into D&D for the first time was this idea that I could experience situations in a very safe and made up way, where all of the consequences that are constantly like assaulting my mind in any given moment don't matter. And for some reason that just clicked correctly in my brain to the point where it was like, you don't need to be anxious about this. It's not real. And that kind of did the trick in a weird way.
At least gave you a lot of practice. That is lovely.
Exactly.
So how long were you? Okay, God, I just already, again, 700. We've already reached the point where I have 700 questions of follow-ups. So for your home game, do you remember, was it like a lot of like homebrew stuff that your dad was doing, or was your dad doing like modules and kind of pre-written stuff?
He was just doing Keep on the Borderlands, and I don't know if he added things onto it. He must have, because we played it for a while. But as soon as that ended, I went out and I bought the 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons books with like my allowance. Actually, I probably convinced my dad to buy them for me. But I remember very distinctly, I bought the 3rd edition books, like the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, the first Monster Manual, and I took them home and I started reading them. And a month later, 3.5 came out.
Oh, yep. That is also teenage Nathan's like actual nightmare of like, I paid money for this thing that is now, as far as I'm concerned, useless.
Exactly. I was obsessed with those books. It took me a long time, actually, after that to get the 3.5 books. It was kind of like, 3rd edition's fine. How different could it be, But I would just read them cover to cover, and I didn't really have anybody to play with. And so I would just like read through it and make characters. I think by that point, my dad was not interested in learning how to play a new edition of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. Get that.
So it was basically just me making characters. And then I went to summer camp and found a group of people who didn't know how to play Dungeons and Dragons, but knew enough about it to be excited about it.
Hell yes. That's some of the best to play with. Absolutely.
Exactly. And I have very strong memories of us constantly getting in trouble, because it's summer camp and you spend a lot of time moving from location to location. And we would pack all of our books and things from location to location. And anytime we stopped, we would pull out the books and the character sheets and the dice and play as much as we could before the counselors told us that we had to move on. Oh. And so it got to a point where they were just constantly like, don't do that. Stop. Like, we're just going to be here for 5 minutes. It's going to take you just as long to pack up as you're going to have to play. So just stop. And I don't think they ever actually succeeded. But from there, we started going over to each other's houses and playing a little bit here and there. And by the time I got to high school, I had a group that I played with after school on Fridays in the shop room. And that's how I met my best friend, actually. And that is a repetitive theme throughout my life, is most of the friends that I have made, especially the ones that have endured this long, I met through TTRPGs.
To take just a teeny step back, when you were just like reading the books, you know, and when you didn't have any outlet for all of the new knowledge that you suddenly had, do you remember, or do you have any kind of like impression of what that was doing for you? Because, you know, like you said, playing with your family, obviously it's family bonding and a little bit of kind of self-assurance and getting to express yourself in different ways and kind of distance yourself from the still very scary outside world. But, you know, it was kind of just you, and it was just a solitary activity. What made you keep going into the books other than, oh God, I spent my allowance on these, I better get something out of them?
In hindsight, I was definitely playing solo TTRPGs before those were a thing. I would make these characters, and they were basically just blueprints for stories that I was writing in my head. And I would come up with these like elaborate backstories and connections between these characters. I made the first character that I ever made, Duo. I remade him. I gave him a last name this time.
Ooh, and then character growth.
Right, exactly. And I gave him siblings. And so he had a brother and a sister, and I created this like entire family lore behind their family. Awesome. And just kind of imagined all of the different circumstances. And it was definitely fueled by this thought, like, I'm going to play these characters someday and it's going to be great. It's going to be so cool. They're going to be the coolest characters ever. And I don't think I ever did get a chance to play most of them. I definitely played Duo, but I don't think I ever got the chance to play the rest of them.
And at this point, were you mostly the DM storyteller, or did you guys switch off? Or like, how early did you kind of like step into the role of, I'm the one who runs a lot of the games?
At summer camp, we were nobody was really the GM. We all had like DM NPCs. Like I would still play my character even if I was the storyteller, and technically we would trade off, but it was all just anime bullshit anyway.
Hell yeah.
Really anybody could pick up where the other person left off. And we rarely actually consulted the rules.
Yeah, I mean, same many times.
Exactly. I will say by the time I got to high school, the people that I met in high school did not know how to play and were not interested in learning how to run games. So I was very much kind of forced into the DM role there. And I actually think that was the point where I started to realize that I enjoyed running games far more than I enjoyed playing them. I've thought a lot about that. It is something that sticks with me. And I, in hindsight, I think the reason is I have ADHD, which was not diagnosed when I was a child. Shockingly.
What? A guest, a TTRPG guest on Reckless to Talk, talking about their childhood of undiagnosed neurodivergence? What?
It's crazy, right? What are the odds? It can't be all of us.
No, statistically. Interesting.
But running a game is literally the only time in my life where I am 100% engaged in something. And my brain cannot think about something else or focus on something else or check my phone. It is the only time in my life that I am 100% on. There's always something happening. I always have to be thinking about the next thing and what's going to happen. And that is such a rare feeling for me that it is honestly kind of addictive.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you still both kind of find yourself mostly being in and enjoying the storyteller role? And does it still scratch kind of similar like creative and like base adrenal needs for you?
Absolutely. Yes. There's a very clear chart where I feel like if you could monitor my heart rate, where it spikes right before a game and then it evens out and then it spikes right after a game.
Yep. I think that is also a relatively common vibe. Is once you're in it, cool as a cucumber.
Exactly.
But bookended by high anxiety. So when did you kind of start getting an inkling of wanting to make games for public consumption? You know, either like, cool, and then we started doing it, or just like, when did that almost occur to you as an option?
Relatively recently. And I could not tell you why this was, but as I grew up playing these games, like you heard about Acquisitions Incorporated, which I think was the first one that I ever heard of. And then later on, I would start to hear about Critical Role and the others, the other big ones. But growing up in this hobby, there was this sort of prevailing attitude for a very long time of like, why would anybody want to watch somebody play D&D?
Totally.
that sounds so boring. Like, well, you could just play it yourself. Why would you want to watch somebody? And it wasn't until just about the start of the pandemic, or maybe a little bit before, that I actually started listening to some actual plays. Like I mentioned, we mostly played Pathfinder with my home group, and somebody recommended the Glass Cannon podcast.
Yep.
And started listening to that. Right. And it immediately made total sense. And I was like, that's why. This is very good. Okay, cool. And I think eventually there was an ad on Glass Cannon podcast for Drunks and Dragons, now Greetings Adventurers.
Yep.
And then I jumped to that. And around the time of the pandemic, somebody turned me on to Dimension 20. I will say to this day, I have not watched an episode of Critical Role. I don't know what it is. And at this point, I'm afraid to ask.
You're also, again, you're not as alone as you would think, being, at least of polls from Reckless Talk guests. There are lots of people who are like, yeah, I watched 2 or 3 episodes. It's like, cool, I get it. This is awesome. I got other stuff that I'm going to go do. So again, safe space.
Absolutely.
Going into, between the high school years and, kind of like the launch of Live from the Apocalypse, there are many years of gaming kind of in between, obviously. So were you still playing kind of consistently kind of throughout that? And were you still like storytelling as part of that? Were you still only playing D&D, or kind of what were the things you were doing and kind of creating that built into what we see before us today?
It is a thing that I have never stopped doing, playing TTRPGs. It is a consistent theme throughout my life. And I got to college and I didn't know anybody, and I was a very anxious person, and I had kind of had a hard time making friends. And then I found some people who were playing different games, not Dungeons and Dragons, not even Pathfinder at that point. This was actually pre-Pathfinder. And that was my first experience playing anything that wasn't Dungeons and Dragons. I got invited to play a game of the original edition of Scion by White Wolf Games. That was my first non-D&D system. And from there, we played Exalted and Mage the Awakening and all of the White Wolf games. There was not a wide selection of D&D alternatives at that point.
Kind of right in the middle of the large bottleneck, yeah.
Exactly. We often talked about playing Shadowrun. We never successfully did it, which is also a common theme. And from there, I naturally got into LARPing. There was a LARP group at my campus. We did dramatic, again, White Wolf LARPs. They were usually Vampire the Masquerade or Werewolf or Hunters. And I became one of the GMs for that. And I don't remember what I was now, the vice president maybe of the club. Did that pretty much the whole way through college. And that is how I met most of the other people involved in Live from the Apocalypse.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, we stayed friends after college. We did all this LARPing together. We continued to play games at people's houses, branching out again from systems that were not Dungeons and Dragons, which I think is where some of the system diversity of Live from the Apocalypse comes from. We've always been a group that's very interested in trying new things, and especially trying weird things. And yeah, these were the only people that I gamed with for a very long time, pretty much up until the point where we started doing content creation.
You had kind of started, again, kind of like you had these two forces in your life, right? Where you had a regular gaming group and you were now aware of actual plays. When did those things kind of all come together, and what was the reasoning behind it?
There were a couple of people that I was very close with, very good friends with. Actually, Andrew, who is the other person who I guess sort of founded Live from the Apocalypse with me in its earliest incarnation. Andrew reached out and said, I've been listening to a lot of The Adventure Zone, and I think we could make a podcast. I want to run an Urban Shadows game, and I want us to turn it into a podcast. I've got it all figured out. Everybody is going to come to my house, and we're going to sit around a table. I bought a bunch of lavalier mics. He was like, we're going to do this seriously, and it's going to be really good, and I'm going to edit it all, and we're going to release it as a podcast. And the day that we were supposed to get together and record in person was the day that lockdown was declared in the state where we all live.
Yowza.
Yep, literally the day of. And so we had a conversation over Discord, which was like, should we still do it? And everybody was like, I'd feel safer if we didn't. Maybe we could move it online. So from there, we tried to move into everybody recording it locally on our various shitty computers over Audacity, because that was all any of us knew how to use.
This, I think, again, story of all pandemic podcasts is roughly that.
And we we decided we would send all of our files to Andrew and he would edit them together. And we did that, I think, maybe 4 times before we said, this is bad and we're never going to release it.
Got it. I was going to say, wait, did I miss a podcast in there somewhere? Is there something? Okay, nope. Answers the question. Fair enough.
You did not. I think there may be some Audacity files still floating around on somebody's computer from that, but it will never see the light of day.
Yeah, not even as a fun, like, way back when, behind the scenes. Like, no, it's been burned. We threw it into the trash.
It was very bad. I did not have an external microphone. I was not the only one who didn't have an external microphone. It was truly awful.
Got it. Yep.
But we suddenly had a lot of time on our hands. And so we decided we were going to keep playing the game and we were just not going to worry about recording it or turning it into a podcast. And so this group of us kept playing that Urban Shadows game. And I started running a Masks game around the same time. And that was the only time in my adult life that I've played 2 games unstreamed or anything every week.
Yeah, right. Yep. I also had that, and it was a time.
It really was. It really was. But at some point during that, I had made a Twitch channel. My partner was a Twitch streamer. And I kind of knew enough about Twitch at that point that I was like, I could probably do this. And I made a Twitch channel and I called it Live from the Apocalypse because we were in the middle of a pandemic and it felt like the world was ending.
Yep.
So during the pandemic, we were fundraising for Extra Life as a group, which is a thing that group of friends did pretty much every year. But obviously we weren't content creators or anything. So it was just kind of posting on Facebook and being like, hey, do you want to donate to this? Do you not want to donate to this? Actually, that is the story of how I drank an entire bottle of Malort.
Oh, hey. Well, now we get to the real portion of the interview.
Yeah, this is all about Malort. One of the donation incentives that I did was if you donated $20, I would film myself drinking a shot of Malort and post it on social media. And so I managed to get through a whole bottle. We raised a bunch of money.
Whoa.
A dubious honor.
That's a lot of $20. So thumbs up there.
Eventually I had to get creative with it. So if you scour social media hard enough, you'll find videos of me luging a shot of Malort into my mouth with a slice of pizza and also drinking it out of a shoe.
I think I have seen the shoe one.
You might have. I think I sent that to you, actually.
Yeah, I think you have shown me the shoe one. I don't think I've seen the pizza one. But I mean, I imagine it with perfect clarity. So I almost don't need to see the real thing.
Exactly. So I streamed this game on this channel, this Twitch channel that I had made, and basically called it quits after that. It was kind of like, well, Extra Life is over. I don't think we're going to do anything else with this.
We did the thing.
Exactly. Later on, Andrew and I were talking and we were lamenting the fact that neither of these podcasts actually happened and it kind of sucked. And I was like, well, what if we just started streaming some stuff? Like, not those games. I don't think anybody wants to stream those games, but we could stream some other stuff and we could just do it for charity, like we were doing before. That was kind of the birth of the channel, was that conversation.
Something that immediately jumps out at me was that commitment to raising for charity and that kind of being like the tentpole of your guys' channel. And for context, you don't not accept subs, because I don't know if you can.
You cannot turn that off, as it turns out.
But every single stream, there is a charity in mind. So why was that kind of a core tenet for you guys? And like, where did that really come into play? Especially because you guys saw the Adventure Zone. You were aware that you can do this in a way that is at least like, you play it and you have fun. And that's kind of the extent of it. So why was that kind of a core part of it for you guys?
That idea was really something that I was trying to champion in early conversations. And obviously we had the experience where we were fundraising for Extra Life. And that had been kind of the birth of the channel. So it felt very natural. But also, I have spent a very large portion of my life in punk rock and DIY spaces, if you will. And a thing that has come from that, fortunately or unfortunately, is a deep-seated fear and discomfort with monetizing anything that I do ever for the rest of my life. It has gotten better, but unfortunately, this sort of sellout mentality is still deeply ingrained in so many of us who grew up in that subculture. And for better or worse, I would say for better at this point, I'm very proud of the channel and I'm very happy that we did make this decision. But at the time I was like, I don't want to give Amazon or Jeff Bezos any money if we can avoid it. So what if instead of us making any money off of this, we just ask people to donate instead? We just ask people to give that money to a charity And at first, it was a very informal process. It was kind of like whatever charity we thought was relevant at the time.
Right.
We switched between them a lot. Since then, it has definitely formalized into a very set system of we are supporting this organization until we raise X dollars. And then we are going to pick a new organization to benefit until we raise X dollars. Then that way we can kind of spread our support as much as we can without having a different group every week that we have to like introduce people watching to and encourage them to donate to.
It's always been really interesting kind of for me to learn about the different approaches that people have for anything, but for this sort of thing and this sort of topic. You've been around in the space because when did Live from the Apocalypse start? Like, what's the official birth date, I guess, that you guys would give it?
We officially started in 2021, but we did not really have any. Actually, that's not true. We officially started in 2020, but we really did not have any eyes on us until 2021. It took a very long time for us to find sort of the online TTRPG space. And before that, it was really just a handful of our friends who would watch us.
Yeah. So you have been in said online TTRPG space for a good hunk of time, for as long as at least we have, certainly. And have, I imagine, seen many other channels do things a lot of different ways, whether they have a core group of people, whether they have a huge cast of people that they kind of swap in, what have you. But I think for the most part, all the ones that I'm familiar with, if they are not actively monetizing, are at least passively monetizing, and you're like, yep, absolutely subs, or we have a Patreon or what have you. And now that you have been kind of creating your way and have been putting out the art, I guess, that you want to in the way you want to and kind of in the structure you want to versus how you kind of have seen other people. How do you, I guess, feel about the structure? That's a very basic ass way of putting it. But what does that process do for you? Kind of what does that offer you as a creator, you as a person, you as an owner and operator of this channel?
Well, one of the foundational principles of Live from the Apocalypse was that it is, and I think this is one way that we differ from other channels that do a lot of charity stuff, is that we decided very early on that we were going to be content first and fundraising second. It was about the games that we were playing and the stories we were telling and the people that we had in the games. And the charity fundraising was very much just a background thing. And the reason I think for that is because you see so many other people doing these big charity fundraisers on Twitch. That's not normally what they do, but they decide, for a week or a weekend or something like that, they're going to do a big series of charity streams. And they raise thousands of dollars in one time, right? But that is because it is a very standalone thing. It is not the norm. It's a special event. And if you are always doing that on your channel, it's just not sustainable to keep it up. It's not sustainable to keep that same level of interest or enthusiasm going for the entire time. So instead, we kind of just decided that we would mention it at the top of the stream. We would mention it at the end of the stream. We would have things in the chat that would post about it, but we really weren't going to push it other than saying, this is what we would prefer for you to do. And we also hope that you enjoy this content that we are creating for you. So it's more of a slow trickle of donations than it is this massive burst of support. Yeah. And so because of that, I think it's a little more understated for us than it is for other charity things that you might see on Twitch. But it seems to be working. So
yeah, I was going to say, you guys, even just since I have been aware of you and, kind of jumping in streams every once in a while, it always seems like you have a new charity to support that you've already raised X amount for the last one and are on to the new one. So yeah, like you said, it seems to be working out just fine.
Things have been picking up definitely in that department. And I will say, in the interest of full disclosure, we did end up having to admit that we would have to accept some level of financial support, mostly because people kept asking and people kept subscribing, mostly with Prime subs. We try to encourage people to only do it if they have Prime subs, since they're already paying for Amazon Prime, for better or worse, and it's included for free in that subscription. When we got our first Twitch payout, which was like a year or two in, because we were telling people not to do it, we were kind of like, shit, what do we do with this?
Yeah, we have no frame of reference as to what to do with this $90 or whatever that Twitch has deigned to give us.
And so we just donated it. We just gave it away to the organizations that we were fundraising for. But as we have been doing this for longer, our production quality has gotten better, and we have started to use more software and more assets and things like that. And people kept asking us if there was a way that they could support us without Twitch subbing. And so at a certain point, we were like, well, all right, I guess we'll make a Patreon since people keep asking about this. So there is a Patreon. We do occasionally get Twitch payouts. We have merch that we sell. And the policy that we put in place to handle all of that is we basically set what we call a support cap. And that support cap is the maximum cost of our operating budget, which includes like character art if we decide to start up a new game, software subscriptions, things like that. And any amount that goes over that support cap, we donate. I will say, we don't make a lot of money still. We have not hit that support cap yet.
I mean, yes. We are very happy that we were able to afford a couple of new microphones and can cover website hosting fees.
I think we are about to use the sum total of the money that exists in the Live from the Apocalypse PayPal on character art for a new game.
Hey, cool. That's the best. So for you, and especially for this, coming from, kind of a punk music and DIY space and mindset, I have certainly heard you talk about and tweet about the role of capitalism, I guess, in art creation and in space and that kind of stuff. And obviously, I'm certainly interested in kind of any just general thoughts you have on that, but also of kind of your own process and mindset around figuring that out as that has evolved for you guys. Going from like, it's easy, just all donations, and we get one Twitch payout, and what do we do? Gross, cool, donate it. Like, versus kind of like working a little bit more in kind of the quote unquote traditional system. What were your thoughts on that? And how did you guys kind of like come to that decision, knowing how important your charity roots are for you guys?
I have been involved, or at least adjacent to punk spaces for pretty much my entire life. Since I was in high school, there was a small punk venue in the town where I went to high school, and I would go and I would see my friends' bands there, and occasionally larger bands would come through and play. And obviously that was the heyday of mall emo and pop punk and all of that. We were all big, MCR fans before it was cool. And I think one of the things that growing up in those spaces really teaches you is that you can just do stuff. You just do stuff yourself. You don't have to have a degree or a formal education or training or even be particularly good at any of it. There are plenty of bands that have achieved some level of success or at least personal satisfaction that are not good at playing instruments and are not good at singing. And that sort of instills a very particular mindset in you. And I think that is definitely carried over into Live from the Apocalypse. I do a lot of the behind the scenes work and a lot of the technology. And I am not a person who has ever been good at that before. But when we started doing this, I was like, I think I'm just going to learn how to do all of this. I think I'm just going to teach myself.
Yeah.
Pre-pandemic, I was a freelance music journalist and a music photographer. And those were also just things that I had decided to do one day. And there are enough websites and blogs out there that cover punk music that if you start emailing people and saying, hey, can I write for you? Hey, can I take pictures for you? They'll say, sure, send me some stuff. Nobody's getting paid for any of it, of course. But I just bought a camera and taught myself how to edit photos and started doing it. Obviously, I had the writing experience. So when we started making content, I guess, when we started playing TTRPGs on the internet, there was all of this background information of like, well, you have to learn OBS. Well, you have to learn about the equipment that you're using. Well, you have to learn how Stream Elements works and all this other stuff. And I was like, well, I'll just learn how to do that stuff. I'll just learn how to edit video. And another part of my background is that I was a public librarian for a very long time. I worked in public libraries for 10 years. I was a public librarian for about 5 or so years. And that involves a lot of teaching adults how to use technology. And that also carried over into running Live from the Apocalypse because I have taught other people who are associated with us, other storytellers on our channel, some of the other organizers, how to stream, how to use OBS, how to edit YouTube and VODs and things like that. And that is lightened the load, and that has definitely carried over. But I think like at its core, there are a tremendous number of parallels between DIY spaces and TTRPG spaces. I mean, there have never been, more indie publishers than there are today, more people who are just kind of literally doing it themselves and writing zines. Like I think that there's a Zine-a-thon going on right now.
Yeah, Zine Month right now.
Zine Month is happening right now, and that is not a term that I ever thought I was going to hear outside of like a venue on a Saturday night. And, same with like people doing homebrew and people who are streaming AP content, but don't necessarily have a dedicated audience. Everybody is just kind of doing the same thing that people in punk spaces do, which is putting your art out there and seeing if anybody likes it.
So you as someone who has been involved in that mindset, I guess, for a long time, how do you find the experience of just putting your shit out there? Like, you had a lot of practice doing it, certainly. So was there a hump that you had to get over? Is it still pain? Or like, kind of what's your experience with taking that leap and just saying, here's what we did. Do whatever you want with that information.
For me in specific, I don't want to speak for anybody else. It's very easy. It's very easy to put things out there, especially things that we have created. Like I said, the scary part is the before and after, but during it, I couldn't care less about, how weird it is or if somebody likes it, because that's kind of the norm. Sometimes you're the only person in a room watching a band play, and they still play. And sometimes they still have the time of their life, and that's obvious. And if you are enjoying what you're doing, if you are enjoying performing and doing the thing, it shows. And so another fundamental principle, I would say, of Live from the Apocalypse that we say all the time to each other is we would be doing this anyway. If we weren't streaming this, these are still the games we would be playing. These are still the stories we would be telling. These are probably still the same people that we would be playing games with, especially if we were lucky enough to have the opportunity. We try not to take ourselves too seriously, and we try just to focus on having fun, because I think that's what people respond to.
Yeah, for sure. What part about the act of creation works for you? Especially, someone who is very focused on, I am doing the thing right now, and that's when it's best, is doing it. And then whatever happens before and after, cool and great. But what, kind of fires does that stoke for you?
So we haven't talked about this before, which is it's gonna come out of left field. But I grew up spending half of the time with my dad because, like I mentioned, my parents were split up. Mm-hmm. And for a while, my dad was a professional improviser.
Fascinating.
My dad was part of a touring improv group that was very, in hindsight, very DIY and punk rock. They would sort of just get into a van and travel across the country and perform improv for people. And it's kind of crazy to think about in hindsight. Honestly, I don't think about it much anymore because he is so far divorced from that life now. But that's kind of an environment that I was raised in, right? Like every Sunday we would go and we would have brunch at this little bar, and like all of my dad's friends would be there, and they were all these crazy improv people who like were on a lot of drugs because it was the 90s. But I didn't know that as a child. And so that kind of spontaneity was kind of ingrained into me, and that love for improv and like the craft of improv. And that's something that I have done throughout my life, but it's not a format that I really find myself drawn to very often. I enjoy the act of it, but for me, that sort of sense of telling a story, of being live, of having an audience and not having a plan, that is such a rewarding and interesting challenge because there's no expectation one way or another. There's no expectation that you make people laugh. There's no expectation that you be funny. There's no expectation that you be dramatic. You can be all of those things and you can be none of those things. And you can just let the chips fall where they may.
So are you someone who tries to go as little plan as possible? Are you pretty much a seat of your pants kind of storyteller?
I am. I have a very set formula for how I plan games. I think about, and a lot of this is involuntary, I should say. Most of my games start with like, I just think of something cool, and then I'm like, that'd be really cool. And then my brain starts latching onto it and is like, I could turn that into a game. I should turn that into a game. I'm going to. So normally what comes out of that is where I want the story to start, right? What is the first scene? Because my brain also works very cinematically. What is the first scene we see? What kicks off this story, right? And then from there, I think about what is the overarching story that I'm trying to tell? And where do I want it to end? What do I think would be a cool ending for this particular notion of a game? And whatever happens in the middle happens. The beauty of that format, though, is that you can pad the middle for as long as you want. As long as people are interested, you can just keep doing thing after thing and side story after side story. And then eventually when people say, I'm getting kind of bored of this, or like you start losing interest in it, you say, all right. And then you just shift it into endgame.
Yep.
And usually the endgame has changed by that point because of the decisions the characters have made. Sometimes you get to preserve that initial cool thought. Sometimes you think of something that's even cooler. But yeah, for that middle section, I very much like to just play fast and loose and see what happens.
So this, just kind of like thinking of the stories that you guys are telling, but also the stories that you enjoy as someone who has been consuming and making and writing and thinking about stories for a long time. Are the stories that you like to create and the stories you like to consume, are those different, or are those kind of the same for you?
I would say that they are connected. The stories that I like to consume absolutely influence the stories that I like to create.
Yeah.
Most of my games, and I would speak for my fellow Live from the Apocalypse people as well, and say that almost always one of us will consume an interesting piece of media, whether it be somebody else's actual play or a TV show, or we'll read a book, and you just can't stop. There's something about TTRPGs, right? Where it gives you this brain worm where it just clicks in your head, and your head is like, how would you make that into a game? What system would you use? What do you think the overarching narrative of that would be? That'd be kind of cool, right? For me, starting off, a lot of what I wrote when I was doing writing, when I was trying to be a writer, was influenced by the media that I loved growing up as a child and as an adult. And now that I am doing more TTRPG stuff and have more opportunities to tell my own stories, I find myself going back to those old ideas that did not work out as novels or short stories or whatever.
Totally.
And exploring them in more of a collaborative storytelling environment with people that I respect immensely, and seeing if they work that way. So it all kind of comes full circle back to our influences in the media we consume, right? And I don't know that there's a way that any of us can turn that off.
Are there any themes that really stick out to you that you find yourself either exploring or even just, kind of using, I guess, kind of having as part of kind of your story design process, especially now that you're putting out a lot of them and having to do so rapidly and, a weekly or multiple times a week basis, say?
I think the obvious through line that a lot of people would point to, and that I also can't help but acknowledge, is that capitalism is always the bad guy. And that is the sort of the grounding principle of every game that I have run, probably every game that I will run. Another one is telling what I like to call gray stories, where everyone is fucking up a little bit, right? Like, I wouldn't say that it is to the degree where everyone's a bad person. That genre certainly exists. Those pieces of media certainly exist. And that's not really a story that I'm interested in telling, but I am very interested in telling stories where everyone is fucking up a little bit, and the degree to which they're fucking up impacts the story and where it goes.
Yeah.
But it can also be very heartwarming, and it can be very funny. And there's a lot of different shades within that gray that you can mess with.
Do you find yourself, when you are putting together these stories of people who are some amount of fuck ups, are you someone who likes to see it get better and see maybe they fuck up a little bit less tomorrow? Or are you someone who's like, this person will keep fucking up, maybe in different ways, but will keep fucking up or fuck up worse? What's the trajectory of your fucking up in the story?
It's very interesting. I don't have any skin in that game, I would say. I am far more interested in seeing the players' interpretations of those fuck ups and seeing how they interpret them. I have run games many, many times. I've had sessions of some of the games that we play on Live from the Apocalypse where I put in an NPC who is fucking up in a very specific way that I think is maybe not harmful or kind of funny. And they hate them. They instantly despise them, and they say, this is the worst person we've ever met, and we don't ever want to have to interact with them again. And I'm like, oh, fascinating. Okay, interesting. Well, they're going to be around for a while, and so we'll see how that plays out. But I am far more interested in that reaction, I think, and sort of basing the direction of what follows off of that feedback.
Hi, everybody. It's Sophie here with the midroll.
Hi, everyone. It's David, also here with the midroll.
Because we're a pair.
It's true. And also, we live next to the recording stuff, so we're doing it.
We do all the things when we forget about all the things.
Which is now.
But we did not forget that our DM, Nathan, is very active on Twitter, and you should follow us.
At reckless_attack on Twitter. We post a lot of fun memes and other content, and we think you'll really enjoy it.
Because we do. And I always say we're delightful.
I actually follow our own Twitter feed because I think that it's fun and Nathan is fun.
I will admit, our Twitter feed and the friends we make there are the only thing I do on Twitter.
Yeah, pretty much.
All of my notifications are just Reckless Attack.
Yep, just our fun
our
little
friends.
TTRPG podcast community.
Because the community is also delightful. But also, what's a delight is that we're also on YouTube.
We are on YouTube.
I frequently forget that. But it's great.
We post a lot of clips there. We post our episodes there. So if you don't have any of the Spotify, Apple, I don't know how else you listen to it.
Podcast players.
Yeah.
If you're already on YouTube, listening away to some sweet, sweet synthwave, because YouTube is the only medium that you can really find good.
It is the
synthwave.
only, it's the only good synthwave I found.
Exactly. So if you're there listening to some synthwave, just throw some Reckless Attack podcast in there.
Yeah, cue it up.
It'll be great. What else are we supposed to talk about? You can rate us on Spotify, everybody.
You can. That's a new...
I did that.
Yeah, that's a new feature. I've been
didn't
going
forget.
around to all the podcasts that I love, including Reckless Attack, and rating them 5 stars on Spotify, which you should do too, if you haven't already.
Please do. If you're here, still listening to this mid-roll, please rate us on Spotify.
It doesn't have to be a 5. It can be anything. Whatever you want.
Be honest. We welcome constructive feedback.
It's true.
And that's it. That's all we got. Arthur's going to start barking.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
So when you have an idea that excites you, right? That is that earworm that is just like, I have to turn this into a game. Do you know what flips that switch for you? Or is it just something about it just kind of speaks to you as like, this is something interesting? Or is there like, here's what I look for, or here's what like I know lights up my brain consistently when I'm looking for stories or passively consuming them and something kind of turns on?
I wish I could say that there is a way that I could interpret that or control it. Unfortunately, there is not. Vampire Records was literally born from a joke that I made on the internet, where I was thinking about Empire Records, a movie that I love very much from the 90s.
Which is a movie filled with people fucking up quite a bit.
It sure is. And I think I tweeted, Vampire Records, is that anything? And people replied with, various levels of joking, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I was like, it'd be really funny is if there was a store called Vampire Records and it was kind of a riff on Empire Records, but it was also kind of like a different 90s property, maybe Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Indeed.
And then I couldn't stop thinking about it and was like, this would be a great game. This would be a very good idea for a game. It's just a group of record store employees and they fight evil.
So you guys put out a lot of shows. You guys are live from the apocalypse somewhere between 2 and 4 times a week, I think, or something like that.
On average, 3. 3 is our normal lift for a week.
And I guess first, how many of those games are you involved in? And I will paint with a broad brush there.
So I will say 2 of those slots are Wednesday night slots. We tend to do alternating weeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have games Sunday nights, we have games Tuesday nights, and we have games Wednesday nights. And sometimes we throw in a few more here or there, depending on what's going on. But the Wednesday night slots are reserved for a series of games called Wildcard Wednesdays, which alternates the storyteller and the system and the players, and usually goes for about 3 episodes or so. That was what Vampire Records was. So those games I am sometimes involved in. I am sometimes not involved in those. Of our Sunday night games and our Tuesday night games, of which there are 4, I am involved in 3 of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, got it.
And I'm currently involved in both of our Wildcard Wednesday games as well. So that is 5, I guess.
And how much of do you, because it's obviously it's live streamed, so not as much, kind of like after the fact editing or whatnot, but are you doing quote unquote all the tech stuff for you guys as well, of setting up the calls, of doing the overlays, of doing all that kind of stuff?
I am not. We don't really do a producer model like a lot of other channels do. Up until now, it has really just been myself and Andrew who have been running games, even though a lot of other people have been involved as players or have joined in with our one-off fundraisers or things like that. I will say that I have stepped into a producer role for when we've done big Extra Life fundraisers that last a weekend, or with our 12 games of Hasmus holiday fundraiser, where we did 12 games in 12 days. But as far as our regular content is concerned, I will say that I do build most of the assets and the setup for the streams. I build them in my OBS, and then I export them to Andrew, and he puts them in his OBS. And then really all he has to do is click go live. And that is the model that we're going to be using moving forward as more people start running games on the channel as well. So one of the goals is really just to, make it as easy as possible on everybody involved, so that you don't always have to find a producer for the game that you want to do. You can just say, I want to stream a game, and I can say, cool, I will teach you how to do it. And at this point, that maybe takes an hour or 2 hours. It's honestly not bad.
Yeah, I've been very surprised at kind of the low barrier for entry that there actually is for going live on Twitch. You can really it doesn't take all that much doing. In case anyone listening needs that push, there's YouTube videos. It's not so bad.
Very much kind of a Pandora's box situation, but yeah, you can do it.
Right. It gets, yeah. I mean, that's a discussion for another episode, I think, probably.
Absolutely.
It's the Reckless to Talk After Dark, where it's we're 3 drinks in,
right,
and we're all just well, I'll tell you how it really goes. But you guys do rotate a lot of systems, a lot of stories. Again, it sounds like even more GMs, but go through tons of different kind of stories and storytelling vehicles. You guys, as of this recording, we were using the 1990s or 2000s Angel/Buffy role-playing game for Empire Records. You guys have a Yu-Gi-Oh stream happening. I think you still have a Pokemon stream going.
We do.
And that's literally just right now actively. And I know you guys have played some D&D, all kinds of things, and tons of homebrew stuff from people on your channel who have made stuff. So I know you guys had been playing a lot of different games as kind of the coming together origin story. But was that also kind of part of your channel vision, so to speak? Or is that just something that kind of happened as you needed to tell more stories?
It has definitely always been something that is present. Live from the Apocalypse is our first foray into any type of content creation. I think it's safe to say for anybody involved in the channel, I think that is largely true. But the people that are now largely the organizers behind Live from the Apocalypse would organize these gaming weekends pretty regularly, at least once or twice a year. And they would last the entire weekend. Normally somebody would host them at their house, and people would just say, I'm going to run this system. And then people could sign up to play in that system. And we would, the Friday night of each of those weekends, we would have what we called a keg LARP.
Fucking sold.
Which
Sign me
was
up.
Exactly what it sounds like, where we would, largely the group that ran the LARPs when we were all in college together would put together some kind of silly framework for a story, usually a very flimsy one that we fully expected to devolve long before we actually got to the conclusion of it. And there would be copious amounts of alcohol. There would be kegs available. We were in our early to mid 20s at this point, I should specify. But during those weekends, people would just run whatever they wanted. The tone of it was very not serious. And I think that really introduced a lot of us to new systems. I remember that I ran a Fate Hack Steven Universe game. And I ran a Dread game. I ran a Dread game about a group of people attending the Warped Tour that then suddenly found themselves transported to the gates of hell.
Yeah.
Yep.
One of the classic, hero's journey style adventures. Absolutely.
Right. So the unhinged and very not serious nature of those weekends, I think, kind of just introduced us to how fun it could be to make that kind of content, to not take yourselves too seriously and to try out new and weird systems.
Because you guys go through so many systems, so many stories, are rotating through stuff, rotating through cast members. Is there any just kind of story that you feel is particularly kind of like emblematic of the kinds of knowing that it's one of dozens of shows easily? Is there a good like kind of jumping on point for people just to kind of say, oh, hey, here's what these often feel or look
Those are two, I think I have two different answers to that.
Yeah.
Because there's the question of what do I think is most emblematic of like my particular storytelling style and like what I do at Live from the Apocalypse. And I think the answer to that one would probably be the first game that I ever streamed on the channel once it became like a concentrated effort, a real thing, which was called Nephilim. And it was a gritty, near future sci-fi game, very anti-capitalist in its nature, about how corporations had taken over the world. The wealthy and elite founded moon colonies and basically withdrew from, the solar system entirely. And there was no magic. There was nothing supernatural about it whatsoever. And it was just the story of this crew of scrappers. They were part of what's called the Scrappers Union. They piloted a spaceship. They collected space debris. And they got embroiled in this massive conspiracy and conflict with a group of anti-technology Christian terrorists.
Don't mind me just frantically jotting down notes over on the side here. Don't ever just ignore me. Carry on.
The caveat to that game is that it was the first one that I ever streamed on the channel, so you can chart a clear progression in quality as I was learning how to do TTRPGs good on the internet.
First one. Cannot stress enough. The first one.
But that I'm still very proud of that story, and it's also the only campaign that I have finished on the channel, because all of the ones that followed after that are still ongoing. So it has an ending, and I'm very happy with the ending. It has a beginning, and I'm very happy with the beginning. And it gets better. I promise it gets better if you start watching it. As far as what is most emblematic of the channel as a whole, I think, or rather, what do I think would be sort of the best representation of what we do? Recently, and I think this is not a brand that we are going to be able to divorce ourselves from anytime soon. Recently, we have gotten a reputation, deservedly, for having a lot of nostalgia-based, weird TTRPG content that we have talked about a couple times. So I think what's probably most emblematic of Life from the Apocalypse as a whole is our Pokemon TTRPG that you alluded to earlier, Missing Numbers, which started as a sports anime game about a failing gym in a town in the Pokemon universe, and the group of trainers who came together, an unlikely group of trainers who came together to try to keep it alive and restore the legacy of it, and is now dissolved into eldritch horror.
Yep.
As we are encountering the Missing Numbers. And we are solidly in eldritch horror territory at this point. But I think that is what kind of started the brand.
So I'm kind of curious, just kind of looking holistically over your time at Live from the Apocalypse for two-ish years and change. So kind of first, the easier question, I guess, is what do you hope kind of moving forward for you guys? Like, what is your goal, especially knowing how clear your guys' kind of like founding values are of it being, charity based, of it being like we're having fun, content first, etc. Like, what are you guys hoping for? What are you guys building towards? Or anything? And if the answer is like, we want to do less, that also technically counts as a future vision.
Our only real goal is to keep doing this for as long as we can. And if I could give one piece of advice for making actual play content on the internet, not that I'm remotely qualified to do that, but if I could give one piece of advice, I would say that don't be afraid to walk away from it. Like, don't be afraid to just shut it down one day and call it quits for a variety of reasons. The reason doesn't really matter, but you save yourself a lot of heartbreak and struggle and turmoil if everybody just agrees, hey, this could stop tomorrow and we would still be friends. We would still hang out. We would still play games together. We just wouldn't do it publicly anymore. And this was a lot of fun, but that's over with now. As long as we can keep doing this, we would love to do it. We are happy to do it. It feels good to play games and raise money for charity and to know that people enjoy the content that we put out. And we have met so many amazing people through this and had so many opportunities that we never expected that we would have as a result of this. We've done panels at conventions and like we put on a virtual con, and that's not anything that we thought we were going to do when we started off. We've raised, I think, $15,000 for various charities, like charities that combat police brutality, Planned Parenthood, ocean conservation groups, international rescue groups. We're currently raising money for the First Nations Development Institute. And that's more than we ever thought we were going to be able to do.
And that kind of brings me into maybe the bigger question, which was, how has that experience impacted you? Have you changed as a person, as a creator, as anything, I guess, through the process of being a capital C content creator on the capital I internet? You know, what's that been like for you, and are you different now because of it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know, not because people watch us do it or anything like that, but because we did it, because I do it all the time. I have learned through doing this so much about what I can do, what I am capable of doing. It is fascinating how much I have accomplished just in terms of what I have learned how to do and how I've implemented it for the channel and the games that I run on the channel. All of that, I think, is really just because I think I learned through this exactly what I could do when I stopped trying to accomplish what I've been told that I should accomplish, right?
Yeah.
Like you grow up, and if you like telling stories, if you're good at telling stories, they say, well, you should be a writer. We're told that there's a clear path to what defines success, right? If you want to do X, you should do Y. And that is how you know that you have been successful at it, is when you have achieved Y. And just by focusing on something that I am genuinely interested in, which is playing games, telling stories, and being able to do that publicly in an interesting way, I have honestly completely surprised myself with what I have been able to learn and accomplish. I think in another way that maybe we don't talk about as much, and is definitely not as entirely possible, it divorces you from your real life, right? In a strange way. Like I regularly like you said, we do this 3 to 5 times a week, maybe. And I regularly run into people that I know out there in the world that I am friends with. Maybe I haven't seen them since the pandemic because that fucked everything up. But, and they say like, what have you been up to? And you stop and you think about it. How do you begin to explain any of this? So you just say, oh, not much. But in reality, you're living this whole other life. You just don't know how to verbalize it to anybody who's not involved in it. And that's a very strange and surreal
deeply feeling. Enmeshed in the lifestyle, right? such as us. Is there anything that you would tell past Will? You know, you now get to send a message back, or a series of messages back, just as you're about to launch Live from the Apocalypse, about to have that first very good, very rough session that you're streaming and kind of go through all the bumps and bruises. Is there anything that would be meaningful, I guess, to kind of share with your past self?
Well, see, now we're talking about time travel. And by giving my past self advice, I might actually do the exact opposite of what I'm intending to do. And just,
little fuck ups, et cetera.
Et cetera, et cetera.
Oh no, we've launched another Life from the Apocalypse stream.
Exactly. I am very proud of what we have done, and I am very happy with the way things have turned out. And we have had, I think, an astonishingly easy run of it, to be completely honest. I mean, if I could go back and give myself a piece of advice, a lot of it would involve like learning how to mix audio better, or like, hey, don't fucking do this through Discord. There are better ways, and things like that. Don't pay for Google Meet for, a year when there are free ways to do this out there. But I think honestly, we kind of were lucky enough and put the thought in to get it right very early on. Like the infrastructure for what we built for Life in the Apocalypse has largely endured, even as some things have changed since we started. But like by the time we went live for the first time, we had the same, community Discord server that we have now. And it was built and it was set up pretty much exactly the same way. And some things have changed. We had all of the social media. We were doing all of the social media. We have gotten better at it. I have gotten better at it. I do the social media. I think a good example of this is from the first time we went live. I was dead set that we were going to have closed captioning, that we were going to have a way for the stream to have closed captioning. So even if you go back to the earliest streams, I think, I hope I'm not going to be proved wrong here, but I think if you go back to the earliest streams, we had closed captioning in one way, shape, or form. And we have gone through like 3 different iterations of that before we have arrived on the one that actually works that we use today. But we did our best for a very long time. And I think those ideals that we had in place when we first started Live from the Apocalypse have endured and have served us well. I will say that if I could give a piece of advice to not maybe past Will, but somebody else who is thinking about embarking
I'll
on this.
allow it, I guess.
Right.
If we're talking about time travel, sure. Just say it anyway.
I would say the one thing I have learned that is very important is if you are going to start a thing with people, if you are going to make content with people or start a group with people, you should do it with people who are going to argue with you. And you should do it with people who are going to argue with you that you know you can come back from that argument with, that you can have that argument. You can maybe yell at each other. You can maybe call each other stupid. And then your relationship is going to survive that. But it's so valuable. And I can't overstate this. It is so valuable to just have the ability to have conversations where you are dead set on something, you think it is super important, and somebody else says, I don't think that's the most important thing. I don't think we should do that at all, actually. And then you have a back and forth, and maybe you get mad, maybe you yell at each other, but at the end of the day, maybe you're like, God damn it, they were right. Okay, fine.
Give me a minute. I'll get back to you when I'm less heated, but all right, fair. Yes, absolutely. Do you, and this is maybe to left field, touchy-feely question, but like you guys, like we've talked about, you have a Discord server, you have a pretty big stable of people who want to come and play games and run games and do all kind of stuff with you guys. You've made connections with people on the internet. You've in meaningful, real connections with people all over the place. Does that scope of human connection, is that something that like hits you often, or that like you kind of have this space to consider? Or are you too close, or it's just like, no, we just all play games together? Or also, Nathan, no, that's too hippy-dippy. Fuck off.
I mean, it absolutely blows my mind that we know as many people that we do, that as many people have gotten involved with the channel now as there are. I don't think when we started off and did this for the first time that we ever thought it would look like what it does today. But I would also say, I think, and maybe this is kind of the inverse of the touchy-feely question that you were asking, but I have spent, once again, just such a long time in punk spaces, and I have seen what has sort of recently been making its way through the TTRPG community happen time and time again in that same punk community, which is that, there are bad actors, there are people that are going to take advantage of you and potentially, with one fell swoop, unfortunately, kind of ruin everything that you have built. And a common thing, I have talked about this a lot, but a common thing that you hear in punk and in DIY is this concept of family, right? People talking about how this is a safe space and it's a family, and it's not. And it's never going to be. And it shouldn't be. It genuinely shouldn't be. There should be space for everyone who wants to be involved, but is not your family, and you don't know somebody unless you know them.
And even then.
You should just really be careful about it.
Yeah, protect yourselves, etc.
So, I mean, I guess the more technical answer to that is just like, we don't do, in Live from the Apocalypse, we don't do open casting calls, generally speaking. Sometimes we do if we're doing like a big fundraising push and it's like a series of one-shots or something like that. For long-term campaigns, I don't think we're generally very interested in playing games or having games run by people that aren't our friends. And I want to be clear that friends is a term that evolves, right?
Right.
You can become friends with people that you don't know. Strangers become friends. But as far as our community is concerned, we are always very upfront and very clear about how much we appreciate everybody and how happy we are that they are in the community and that they support us. But like, when you have a platform, you have a responsibility to use it correctly and to try to keep people safe, and also to just make sure people are having fun. Just make sure it's fun.
So thinking about the people aspect, the friend aspect, are there any kind of like any individuals, any channels, any people that have been particularly influential for you? And again, they don't need to be in the tabletop role-playing game space, but just as someone who has helped shape your worldview, your personhood, etc.
100%. First of all, talking about the journey of learning how to actually do this and do it well. I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Justin Crane from No Fame Podcast, I wouldn't know half of the stuff that I know about OBS or audio or anything without his incredible patience and his willingness to just sit with me in a Discord call for hours answering questions over and over again.
I have also experienced that for Reckless to Talk, in fact.
Yep. So Justin is the only reason that anything on the channel sounds or looks good, including the podcast. And I think the other one, the big sort of spiritual influence, has nothing to do with TTRPGs. But for a very long time, I was very embroiled and involved and obsessed with a comedy show called The Chris Gethard Show. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I don't know if anybody listening to this is going to be familiar with it.
Yeah.
But it started off as a public access talk show in Manhattan. It was a New York public access show that was 100% a talk show. And it was completely unscripted, obviously. Anybody could call in. Anybody could say anything. It was very much informed by, an improv mindset. A lot of the UCB folks were involved in it. And Chris Gethard himself was involved with UCB for a very long time. And I think, thinking about the influence that had on me and on Live from the Apocalypse, I always come back to like the Matthew Mercer effect, right? Which we talk about all the time. And we don't really call it the Brennan Lee Mulligan effect, but same thing kind of applies, right? Like holding yourself to this impossible standard because there is editing involved, there are budgets involved, and it's so hard to maintain this like realistic scope of what it is that you are doing and this impossible standard that you are trying to live up to that has, media companies behind it.
And a shit ton of experience.
Absolutely.
That also gets glossed over.
Absolutely.
It's like those dudes have been doing what they've been doing for a long time.
Right. Exactly. But spiritually, I like to think Live from the Apocalypse is much, much closer to the Chris Gethard Show model, where it's just like, we're going to go live and we're going to see what happens. And nobody knows what's going to happen. Anything could happen, but hopefully it'll be funny and maybe sad, but in a healthy and wholesome way. And hopefully you will come out the other end having felt things that you did not feel before.
Will, I have dire tidings for you, because it is now time for the much feared Reckless Talk lightning round gauntlet.
Oh, God.
Have you taken the appropriate spiritual precautions going in? I did provide the list going in, and I know it's extensive, but it is important, so I hope you are prepared.
There was a list?
Question 1. Is your glass half full or half empty?
Boy, my glass is a Nalgene bottle covered in stickers. So I don't know if it's full. I don't know how empty it might be, but when it runs out, I'll refill it.
What excites you creatively, spiritually, and or emotionally?
I think kindness. Honestly, people putting in the work to be kind. I think there's maybe this perception in society that kindness is very easy or it's the bare minimum. But in reality, if we're honest with ourselves, it's incredibly hard work to maintain being kind, especially today, especially with the way that the world is. It's hard. It takes effort. And I think also equally important is it's important to know when to stop being kind. Because it should not be an eternal thing. There should be qualifiers and check-ins, and sometimes you got to stop. I would also say, just hearkening back, I am often creatively inspired, as we've talked about a couple times now, by action. Right? What happens in the middle when you're doing the thing?
What does not excite you creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Everything before and after doing the thing.
What is your favorite sound?
I think a banjo. I really like banjos. I think they sound very cool. And deep in my heart, I have a deep appreciation for the folk punk genre. If there's a weird crossover for anybody out there listening, I have a Ramshackle Glory tattoo. Yes, it is the Ramshackle Glory tattoo. So if you know what that means, then you know.
What sound do you hate?
Oh, I feel so bad about this one. I think keyboards clicking. I think mixing audio and editing podcast has just given me a deep and abiding hatred of the sound of keyboards, unfortunately.
What's your favorite word?
Probably fuck. Probably fuck. I'm sure somebody has said that before, but like you can just say it in so many different ways. You can use it as an exclamation. You can say it angrily. You can say it excitedly. You can say it in awe of someone. You can use it to curse someone out. I think it's maybe the most utilitarian word that we have.
What is your least favorite word?
I think unproblematic.
Ooh.
I don't think anyone is truly unproblematic. And I think if that is a word that you subscribe to, I think it's an indicator that you should look deeper.
What tabletop role-playing game or D&D or whatever, monster or antagonist have you not faced or run that you would love to?
We talked about how I've played very little 5e, and I realize that it's basically a meme at this point, but I want to face Strahd. I do.
Fuck that. Yes, there are a lot of Strahd memes, but fuck that. Strahd is still sick as hell. They're all correct opinions. That's the whole point of the lightning round. But that's a correct opinion.
I want to face the hot vampire man. I don't know what we'll do, but I want it to happen.
What is your favorite adventure of all time? And this can be broadly interpreted as one that you've written, one that you've run, one that you've been in, one that you watched someone else do. It can be 1999's adventure movie, The Mummy. Whatever adventure is, what's your favorite?
How did you know it was The Mummy? No.
That's because it's deep down, isn't it everyone's favorite
Everybody
adventure?
says The Mummy, yeah, absolutely. So the one that comes to mind is during the pandemic, sort of pre or concurrent with LFTA starting up, I ran a Masks game. And that Masks game was called Generation H. And to tie it back into other parts of our conversation, it was based on an idea for a novel that I had started working on and never finished. And I was like, well, let's see how this works as a TTRPG. The reason why that game is so meaningful to me, it was the precursor to our current podcast, Academy H. Yep. Academy H is in the same universe that we built collaboratively over the course of Generation H, 10 years or 15 years in the future. I can't remember exactly how far now. But I just was not done with that world by the time that game ended. And I wanted to try to see what a new group of people who hadn't helped build it did in that sandbox. But the reason why that game is so meaningful to me beyond that is because one of my best friends came out while I was running that. She had been playing a character named Austin, a boy character, for most of the campaign when we started off. And Austin was the Beacon playbook. And if you know anything about Masks, the Beacon is like the heart of the team. They're kind of supposed to bring everybody together. I don't know if you know this about the pandemic, but it was very hard to be a hopeful beacon during that time period. So she was really struggling at the time. And she came to me and she said, I think you should kill Austin. I think it would further the narrative. I think it would be an interesting, dramatic moment. And I was like, I think maybe, what if we retire Austin and then you can make a new character? And we found a way to explain Austin leaving, which I asked her permission to tell the story before I came on the podcast. And she wanted me to specify that not killing Austin was 100% the right choice. And that by retiring him instead, it showed narratively that there was another option to this superhero existence aside from being a hero or being dead. But her new character was named Haley. Her new character was a girl. And a few months after she started playing that character, she came out to all of us at the table and came out as a woman. And I don't know that anything I ever accomplish in the TTRPG space or otherwise, aside from that, is going to mean as much as that did.
What is your favorite tabletop role-playing game character of all time? And similarly, that can be interpreted however you want, when you watched, when you played, an NPC that you have interacted with or been, etc.
This is a this is a hard story to tell, just linearly, honestly. But the other game that we played on stream during the pandemic, the Urban Shadows game that I mentioned that we tried to record into a podcast and were not able to, that game, both of these games were incredibly meaningful because, among other things, they were our only social interactions that we had at the time, and we were playing them every week. But the first character I played in our Urban Shadows game was named Harker. His name was Simon Harker. He was the veteran playbook. He was this kind of John Constantine, warlocky figure, and he was missing an arm. And he was kind of old. He was kind of grizzled. His backstory as it came out was that he and his ex-girlfriend had been servitors to this demon witch who was sort of the big bad of our campaign. And Harker, who was very smart and very capable, eventually negotiated for them to be released. He earned his freedom, and then he tricked the demon into freeing his girlfriend, and it cost him his arm. And that was a sacrifice he had made. And the heartbreaking part of the story was that they went home after that. They moved in together and they tried to start a life. But his girlfriend at the time, who was an incredibly traumatized person and an incredibly violent person because of that, could not deal emotionally with the lack of power and went back to the demon, went back to serve the demon more. And that was kind of the heartbreak in his backstory, right? Was that he had sacrificed everything for this person that he loved, only to have them fall back into the life that he had rescued them from. Harker died partway through the campaign. And in thinking about what I was going to play next, we organized the story so that his ex-girlfriend, Julia, also died. But she died kind of doing the right thing right in the aftermath of Simon's death. And so when I brought in a new character, I brought in Julia, except she was the Revenant playbook, which is an undead force of vengeance, essentially, like an animated corpse that only exists for vengeance and violence. And I played her as this very mindless sort of killing machine. And a moment came up in the campaign where she had the opportunity to be purged of the dark animating force. In the aftermath of that, because it's powered by the apocalypse, I switched playbooks to the Vessel, which is this sort of Frankenstein-y kind of thing. And the justification was that, she was now a reanimated corpse, but she didn't have the super strength of a vengeance spirit or anything like that. But she was clear-headed for the first time, and she was able to make her own choices. And so I got to play her through this entire arc of meeting her from somebody else's perspective, and then her choosing finally to make this sacrifice, because I don't know if you know anything about like addiction, but if you try to make the choice for somebody to pull them out of that, whatever they're addicted to, it's probably not going to stick.
Yeah.
They have to make the choice for themselves. So she got the opportunity to make this choice for herself. She died in the process. She lost her agency again. And then she came back the final time with her agency. And she was able to make the choice, like, she didn't want to kill anymore. She didn't want to be violent anymore. She wanted to start a life. And it was kind of too little too late because Harker was already dead. And that was kind of the tragedy of it. But she still put in the work. And I don't know that I will ever have a character arc as satisfying as that one ever again. It was very unique circumstances.
Last question. What gives you hope?
Honestly, LFTA does. Live from the Apocalypse does. Not in and of itself, not because of anything that we do, but because of the people that support it. Because we tell these like dumb, silly stories on the internet, and they're like blatantly anti-capitalist and leftist, and we say ACAB all the time. And there are like these dumb, super dumb in-jokes that happen on the stream sometimes. Our Academy H podcast has a piece of merch attached to it that is a hat that just says Piss Arc. And that is from a joke that came up in one of our live recording sessions on Twitch. And it didn't make it into the podcast, but we still made merch out of it. And people bought it. We only made it because I put a picture of it up as a joke. And people were like, yeah, I'll buy that. I'll buy that hat. And they did. They bought the Piss Arc hat. And that blows my mind. But we run our mouths all the time about police brutality and like collective action, and we ask people to donate instead of, giving us money directly, and fully understanding that, it's very satisfying for people to support the creators that they care about. We just ask people not to do that. And people still show up and they give a fuck about what we're doing. And I think the way that we have seen the response to our messages and what we do grow over the time that we have been doing this, as people start to take notice, gives me like endless hope for the future.
Will, congratulations. You've made it through the gauntlet. You've made it through the entirety of your Reckless a Talk interview. Again, congratulations. As your victory prize, please tell everyone again who you are, who you've been, where to find you, how to support you, all the good stuff.
I was told there would be a trophy.
Well, it's more of like a heart trophy, where it's like you will forever get to hold in your heart that I was on this tabletop role-playing game interview show.
That's a great point. I can already feel it.
Good. You should get that checked out. It's not, again, it is a purely emotional, spiritual experience.
No.
We take no responsibility for any blockages of your cardiac system. Go see a doctor.
Absolutely. I'll get right on that. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out and listening to this. I only know how to end this one way because we do this live usually. My name is Will. I'm one of the storytellers and organizers for Live from the Apocalypse, a not-for-profit TTRPG studio that makes actual play content in live stream form and podcast form to raise money for nonprofits, aid organizations, etc. You can find everything we do at livefromtheapocalypse.com, or you can follow us on twitch.tv/livefromtheapocalypse, where we do all of our storytelling, including the live recording sessions of our podcasts. And if you want to listen to them in a fully edited and soundscaped and fairly good quality podcast format, you can find Live from the Apocalypse on your platform of choice.
Hey, there we go.
See what we did there.
I mean, you have been a guest on Reckless to Talk, so yes, I did see what you did there. Will, thank you very, very much. All those things will be linked in the show notes. Appreciate you greatly, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.
Should I say bye? Bye.